Hello, Sterile Processing University presents Issues and Challenges in Sterile Processing, a podcast conversation. This episode is titled Ethics in SPD, Doing the Right Thing Every Day. I'm Jason Morosi, Senior Educator for Sterile Processing University.
And I'm Nancy Chobin, the President of Sterile Processing University.
Well, good morning, Nancy. Welcome.
Morning, Jason.
Well, this is a really strong topic. I know this is a topic, one of my favorite topics. The one thing about being in healthcare for so long, ethics is just, it's like tattooed on you when you get to a certain point.
It should be, but unfortunately, it's not always the case.
Yes, not always the case. Having a strong OR background, I think that's where my ethics really came in, which was very important when I went into sterile processing. I had a lot of OR directors because of the operating room background. When I became into sterile processing manager, kind of teach that or instill that to the staff, because with SPD staff, they don't really see the patient, so it's hard for them to translate the ethics part sometimes because they don't have hands-on, but they don't realize how hands-on they are.
That's why it's so important in their education and training to really emphasize that they contact virtually every patient in the facility, whether you're in a surgery center, a dental office, or doctor's office, or a hospital, because either equipment or supplies or instruments you've handled and you've prepared. And so you have an obligation to make sure that it's safe for the patient.
If you really think about it in surgery, the surgical tech really doesn't have much hands-on. They're usually passing instruments, right?
Right.
Nurses are really not even, they're in a corner now on a desk doing documentation. The sterile processing tech has, to me, more hands-on. Like the next person with the sterile processing is the actual doctor doing the surgery. The sterile processing is touching every instrument and making sure that it's clean and properly inspected and sterilized. They have, to me, the second in line of responsibility for ethics when it comes to surgery. You have your doctor, and then your sterile processing tech should be number second in that chain, in my opinion. If it's not clean, right, and sterilized, right, doctors using contaminated stuff.
But a lot of people don't recognize the impact of not practicing good ethics. And this is something you should practice all the time, not just in a hospital setting. For example, how many times do we see somebody doing something like maybe they took something from a store and shoved it in their coat? Well, we don't want to get involved. So we don't do anything. And today it's a little bit different, because today you got a lot of crazy people walking around. If you say something, you can get shot. But in a hospital setting or a healthcare setting, it's a different issue. A patient's life could be in jeopardy. And in a court of law, you could be just as responsible for not reporting it. Because if you did, maybe we could do something to help the patient. There are all kinds of lawsuits that you can read about. One of the most famous was in New York City, where a young woman, I think she was 28 years old, was having a hysteroscopy, and there was a new piece of equipment. So the sales rep was in there and was, telling them how to use it. And the circulator in the room noticed that the patient was not passing fluids. They were looking at how much they were putting in and how much was coming out. And she kept telling them, the fluid isn't coming out. We only have so much and what have you. And whatever the sales rep said, he led them to believe that everything was fine. The patient wound up dying, 28 years old. Now, the nurse swore that she told the rep what was wrong. The surgeon overruled her because the surgeon listened to the rep. And I mean, it was a massive lawsuit. So she tried to do the right thing, but she was overruled. Another one that was very famous, and there was an excellent seminar I went to a number of years ago by a leading authority on accidents. And he investigated every airline accident out there. And he actually wrote a book, Why Hospitals Should Fly. meaning that hospitals should follow all the lessons that the airline industry learned from massive air crashes. And at that, he told a story about in an operating room where they were ready to do either total knee or total hip surgery on a patient. And this was before they started where they had a, doctor had to come in and sign the part of the body that they were going to do surgery. And the head nurse came into the room and said, "Stop. There's a problem with the paperwork. We have to clarify it." So she left the room, and the surgeon said, "I can't stop. I've got other patients to do. We're going to proceed." So he told the staff, "We're proceeding. Keep going with." And she came in again and she said, "Stop." And he said, "I am not stopping. I have other cases to do." She reached over, took the scalpel out of his hand, and said, "You are to stop. This is not the right patient." That seems they had two patients with the same last name, the same birth date, the same social security number with the exception of one digit. That was the only difference. And they would have operated on the wrong patient. If she had not stood her ground, then that patient could have had surgery on the wrong site. So you have to do the right thing. It's something that you have a moral obligation to do the right thing. But a lot of people today, unfortunately, say, "Not my job. I don't want to get involved." And that's when you can get into trouble.
Yes. I mean, and just to show you how surreal this is, especially for the listeners, again, this is a podcast of conversation. Myself was involved in a thing where when I was a surgical tech about 20 years ago, I got called into the nursing leadership office. There was a circulator nurse we were working with that was giving pelvic exams to every patient that came in. I was young, probably 23, 24 years old. And when I was questioned if it was happening, my first initial, because of being a young tech, was I don't want to get involved. But I had to, think about it and go, ethics. You can't let the wrong thing happen to innocent people. Watching the whole process, and it was very horrible. But again, you have to do the right things for patients.
I actually had threats made against me by a nurse. I was a brand new graduate nurse, and I was working the midnight shift. So I was by myself with a couple of aides, and she was a private duty nurse for a gentleman who was in a coma. And he actually wasn't completely comatose. He was having seizures and then would go into coma. So he had to have a seizure medication round the clock. And so first thing I did when I came in at midnight, I'd make rounds. And I go in the room and she's sleeping in the chair. All right, maybe she's taking a little nap. Shouldn't be. That's why she's being paid. She only worked the midnight shift. So after I finished rounds, I'm waiting for her to come in and get the medication. And she didn't. I go back in the room. She's still sleeping. I woke her up. I said, "Aren't you going to give him his medicine?" And she said, I'm sorry. Okay. Every time I made rounds in the room, she was sleeping. My intuition, I've said this on every webinar, my intuition told me something is not right. So the next morning I mentioned it to the nursing supervisor, because they would always make rounds before they went off. And I said, "Something isn't right about this." I said, "She's never awake in the room." I had to tell her about giving the medication. So somehow they did a check. She was not a nurse. She had robbed somebody's pin and cap and was posing as a nurse. And this was not the first hospital she worked at. They arrested her. And as they were taking her out of the building, I was on the second floor and the parking lot was right over, and it was summertime. So the windows were open, and she was screaming, "I'm coming after that witch," for lack of a better word, "and I'm going to kill her because she's taking the money out of my children's mouth." So I had to have police protection for the next 3 nights when I came to work, and I left. And, but I had no choice. I mean, this family was getting ripped off. They're paying her all this money to take care of this poor gentleman, and he wasn't getting the care he needed.
Yeah. And what's even crazy about that? That's a person that's in, pretending to be a nurse. And, obviously that was a while ago. In my town where I live, it was in the newspapers not even a year ago. They had a nurse, I think it was an ER nurse.
Yeah.
3,000 patients they saw, and they were not a nurse, never went to nursing school. Might have went to nursing school, but didn't pass their boards, was not a registered nurse, but faked a nursing license to get a job.
Wow.
And you're talking 2025. That still happens.
There's a gentleman, when I was researching my textbook a couple of years ago, his name is Stephen Conklin, and he authored Ethical Issues in Epidemiological Research and Public Health Practice. And I want to just give a couple of quotes from him because it really bears speaking. Healthcare professionals can face ethical issues such as conflicts of interest, distortion of medical facts, exorbitant or inconsistent billing, poor privacy and security of patient records and information, and compliance with local, state, and federal health regulations. The penalties for not following the guidelines set in training courses given by facilities, and that's your corporate compliance and HIPAA and what have you, are sometimes severe. Workers could face suspension, fines, loss of their medical license if they have one, or lawsuits and even jail time, depending on whether the worker violates employer or licensing body ethics policies or ethics legislation. We had a nurse anesthetist who was in charge of getting quotes for the monitoring equipment in the operating room and the recovery room. She, was meeting with the different reps, had been there a long time. We all had tremendous respect for her. All of a sudden, I hear she was terminated. And I go, what the heck? So at one of our meetings, it came up. And of course, at that time, it was all confidential. But my boss could see that everyone was upset and he wanted to explain what happened. She actually made a deal with one of the reps that if you buy my son this dirt bike that he wants, I'll make sure you get the contract. And apparently another rep had overheard this conversation and reported it to corporate compliance. And she wound up losing her job.
Yeah.
So people realize you can't do stuff like that. Sometimes they have laws now that prohibit that because very often, sales rep, I'm going to take you down to Hilton Head Island and they're having a big conference and I'm going to pay your way there and this and that. Can't do that anymore.
I remember going back to like 2009, a instrument repair company had came to me, and was the one that I used all the time, and they were doing a promotion for a certain amount of repairs. They were giving free iPods.
Ooh.
And I was like, really? And but when you think about it, that's if you gave them a lot of work, and that's just so wrong to do. I know back in the day, you really didn't, it was a little different years ago. I mean, now corporate compliance training is so embedded and done right away, and when you're hired.
Things have changed in healthcare. We have many, many more companies today, which means a lot more competition. And some of the big guys have just absorbed a lot of the little guys. So the little guys that are left really don't have much of a chance to get business. They can't compete with, I'll give you a free, set of instruments. I'll give you a free tracking system or whatever they may offer. It's very difficult. So sometimes companies will resort to things like that. When they do, then it becomes a real issue. And we have to it's very tempting, especially on the technician level, because, the salaries, as we all know, are really not commensurate with the responsibilities that they assume for the work. But that still is not an excuse to put your facility at risk because of all these federal laws now.
And we're going to point out we have the ethics, and then we have corporate compliance, very important. And one of my claim to fame of corporate compliance, and this is a crazy one. I actually worked for a major hospital system in New Jersey, like close to 25 years ago, I guess this was. They had started a merging process with other facilities, and we really didn't have a corporate compliance then. And a big orthopedic company decided to take out selective staff members who kind of worked in the orthopedic rooms more than the others on a boat cruise, with a dinner boat cruise. Well, we were a young group, and we liked to party, so we really got out of hand on the boat and forgot that our sister hospitals' OR teams were all there. Well, they went all back and told all their CEOs what we were doing on the boat. Then all their CEOs called our CEO, who called our operating room director, who put us all in the room. And that triggered corporate compliance training for the whole system. You just don't know. The littlest thing you do can turn into a huge thing.
Well, we have to understand that what we do and how we do it affects the lives of everyone. We may not be thinking about it at the time, but eventually it's going to come out. There's no individual or group that isn't affected by ethics. We really need to understand what is our moral and ethical obligation to do the right thing every time, not just when we feel I'm not going to get in trouble or I don't want to do this because I don't want to hurt Mary's feelings. You have to do it every time because you have to live with yourself. We had a situation where I live in a rural area and was really sad. This was last fall. A young lady who had broken up with former boyfriend about 6 months prior to this incident, and he kept stalking her. And the girl's mother kept reporting to the police. They didn't do anything. One night, her new boyfriend, who she had been with for 6 months, came over. And apparently the previous boyfriend came over and broke into the house. And neighbors heard all this screaming and gunshots, and nobody did a thing. And it wasn't until the next night when the mother was unable to reach her that the police the police do go by that area, but they didn't notice anything. They didn't see anything, so they didn't go in. What did they know? Just lights were on. Nobody said anything. The police went over the next day and they were both dead on the floor. Now, maybe if people had called and said, hey, you better get over here, there's something going on, maybe they would have lived. We don't know. But they have to live with that for the rest of their life. And that's terrible. After 9/11, that slogan, if you see something, say something, it pertains across the board. Across the board. Don't be afraid to say something. If you're wrong, you're wrong. Better to be safe than sorry.
Yep. Just this morning, before our recording, I was watching. Today's kids are into these, battery operated bikes. They had a kid on the sidewalk being chased by a car. The car drove on the sidewalk trying to hit the kid on the motorized bike. But the ethical point of this was you can see all the neighbors running out of their house trying to, get to the car and open the doors and, help because somebody was filming it. So, that's right there. That's, sometimes, you don't want to put yourself in risk, but these neighbors were jumping right in to help because it was the right thing to do.
Well, today everybody has a cell phone with a camera, and that if you don't want to physically get involved, then at least do that. I mean, there was just something, a gentleman went in because a bunch of kids had attacked an elderly woman, knocked her to the ground or kicking her in the head and everything. He went over, he wound up dying. They stabbed him and then took off. He tried to save the life of this woman who is going to recover. She's pretty badly bruised, beaten. But, this is where we live today. But somebody was able to record the whole thing and they were able to give it to the police. They're still trying to find the thugs that did it.
Yep. And of course, I do want to mention if you're recording anything and, know your job's policy, your state's policies, because some states will not allow it and some hospitals do not allow recording. I have been in that situation where I have been recorded without my knowledge at work. And our policy stated at that job that it was not allowed to record somebody without their permission. So the person who did the recording actually got terminated.
They should be. It depends on the state. In some cases, you have to tell somebody, I'm going to record this. I know a lot of facilities do have cameras in different places, and that's for security purposes. I had a young lady that worked for me at a hospital. She was a very good worker. She worked on 3 to 11 shift. And then I had moved on to another hospital. At the hospital I was at, I became aware, administration told me that they had a camera in the loading dock area that was also the material storage place. And they found that she was, after work at midnight, she would drive her car up to the loading dock and she would load all the formula. Now, the hospital got the formula for free because they gave it to the mothers as part of the contract. She would then sell it on the street, and they fired her. So, I had no problem with that. So I go to my next hospital, and guess who's employed there? Her. And I started having problems with her. I don't remember what the incident was. I just remember that I went to administration. They gave me the okay to terminate her. She was terminated in HR with me. On the way back to my department, she went into the locker room. Security was with me, and she pulled out a knife.
Oh my
And
God.
she was coming towards me with the knife, and security immediately, called for assistance. He said, "Everybody stay where you are," including her. They wound up, disabling her, getting the knife out of her, and now she had additional charges. She's never going to work in a hospital again. But this is what you have to remember. You can't be afraid of what someone could do. That is your job. You have to do the right thing. Security was there. Thank goodness HR, had the common sense, because she was really off the rails in HR. I need my job, and she's against me because she fired me at the last job. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't even know she was doing that because she was one of my employees. But, when people do something wrong, that's another ethical issue. Own up to it. Before you try and say you didn't do it, it's going to be worse for you, because you're just piling on all of the lies and everything. And now nothing you says is going to be believable.
Now, with sterile processing, do you feel that, I guess it's kind of, the way it is that the best guidelines to start with, learning ethics would be knowing your standards and codes and policies like AMI, ARN, OSHA.
They do, but there's also should be a professional code of ethics. And when I did my research, virtually every profession in healthcare has a code of ethics. For example, the American College of Healthcare Executives, dental hygienists, nursing. There's nothing for sterile processing, and there never has been one. So a number of years ago, I decided to develop a code of ethics for sterile processing that could even be used, when it comes to processing endoscopes. And I'm going to read it because I think it's important to realize what the expectations are in sterile processing. Number one, always act in the best interest of the dignity, reputation, and good standing of our profession. We get beat up a lot because we do a lot of things wrong. Applying professional judgment and acting responsibly in all matters related to the patient. Always act with courtesy and consideration to all those with whom you have to deal, including fellow professionals. That's a big one. You know how often there's fights going on in the department? I'm not talking about physical, just, verbal altercations that sometimes do lead to physical. Always comply with the regulations and professional standards regarding safety and processing issues. Communicate clearly and concisely. Remember that communication is a two-way process, and listening is critical to the process. How often have people been set up where they say, "Oh, well, do this tray and this tray," and they know it's not the trays that they need because I don't like you, and I just, I'm going to make you get in trouble. That's really bad. Maintain your certification by attending continuing education programs. Retain your certificates for verification of the program content and your attendance. People sometimes 5 years down the road or whenever they have to recertify, "Oh, I can't find my certificates." Or there have been many instances of falsification of certificates.
Wasn't there a thing with that with sterile processing?
We had a number of them with the CBSPD where people were falsifying their certification certificates, and it resulted in CBSPD coming up with a special certificate that people could not tell what the security verified the authenticity of that certificate. As a matter of fact, Joint Commission says that any state where certification is required, we have 7 states now, you should be verifying verbally and in writing that that certificate is valid and, hasn't expired. So people don't do it.
Very easy to do. I know it falls on, I've dabbled a little bit in HR. It falls really on the HR person to do that when they're hiring. And it really is just a simple phone call or a simple fill out a thing on a computer and you use results I mean, they do it for nursing.
Yeah.
As we found out last year, some people are good at faking it,
Yeah.
but it's the technology is getting really out there with the AI. You could do some crazy things.
It's going to get worse, I think.
Yeah. So I would say for ethical challenges, some of the biggest ones are taking shortcuts in pressure, falsifying documents and sterilization logs in our case, ignoring manufacturer's instructions, and favoritism and unfair treatment of staff.
Yes, absolutely. Let's look at some of the issues that we have. One of the first issues we'll talk about is the entitlement issue in ethics. That's where I think we have a picture of this. Some people feel the world owes me for coming to work today. They might feel like the policies of an organization should not apply to them, that they should be treated with special benefits. They feel they deserve more than what they have in life. But regardless of what they have, they always believe that they want more and they deserve more. This is unfair to the rest of your staff. Why do you allow people to take over your department and cause chaos? Everyone else is abiding by the rules, but they're not. And this can be a real cause of dissent in the department, and it has to be stopped. Again, you thought to thank me for showing up today. She even has a title plate that says entitled. I mean, a license plate.
Is that real?
Yeah. But we all have people today who do believe that. They just stroll in and everybody else is at work and they're looking like, oh, you bunch of jerks. You're over here working your butts off. And if I'm working and I'm doing my job, eventually I'm going to say I'm the fool because I'm over here doing this and this one's getting away with it. Why? Because people are intimidated by the person. You can't allow that to happen in your department. It's unfair. You have to be fair to everyone. Yeah. And if you're not, it's going to come back to really, really get you. So you have to treat all your employees the same, no favoritism. You have to make sure that any explanations you give are clear and concise so nobody can say, well, I didn't understand that. And when you do provide a decision, give the rationale. Why are you telling them this? So they understand I'm not coming after you as a person. I'm talking to you about the actions that you took and why they were not acceptable and why it impacts on the department. That's the best way to handle that.
Yeah.
And you have to handle it because people like that very rarely will change. They're that way throughout life. And it becomes a cancer in the department if you don't handle it.
Yeah, it's crazy how one person can just set the whole tone of the room in sterile processing and just make everybody miserable. I've worked in so many places where we're having fun, we're doing our trays, and then the 9 o'clock person comes in that just so happens to be the entitled person, and the whole room changes.
Yes,
and that's
Trouble's here.
That's horrible. We were talking. I have brought up about falsifying documentation and sterilization logs. There's also deeper things in there, like breaking, moving a container and breaking a lock, and then just putting another lock on there. And I have literally seen people take a black Sharpie marker and circle in the indicator to make it black because they didn't have it. Or I've seen people take locks, cook them in a bag, and then have them put aside so that if they broke a lock, they could just, put one on. You break a lock, just redo it. You don't want to take any chances.
But this is why you need clear and concise policies, what people can and can't do. That's an education thing. If you have educated your staff and they continue to do that, then you have to issue disciplinary action because that's endangering the life of a patient.
The other thing that I've seen that I always found interesting was, especially with the new tracking systems, they would get a load up, they would scan everything, and then certain things won't fit. I've seen people leave it on the load, not put it on the load, but leave it in on the load documentation and just put it on the next load. you again, for recall reasons, that's really bad, practice. It doesn't make it on there. You got to scratch it off and delete it. You just can't put it on the next load and then, leave the sticker on it that says load 1. If it's going on load 2, it's got to be load 2.
But again, that's an education issue. Why are you scanning all these things in advance? The process is just like when you do it manually. You write the name of the tray, or you scan it, you put it on the cart. Yep. You write it, you put it on the cart. You don't put anything on that cart unless you've documented it first. If you do that, you're not going to have that problem. We also have another type of issue, and that's work ethic, where everybody thinks that, they should all be working the same as I do. If I do 150 trays, everybody should do 150 trays. But today it's very different. When I started 40 years ago, in my first 2 departments, we didn't have any male employees at all. They were all female. There was my second hospital. We had a gentleman who did the material supplies, and he was located in our department, but he was not sterile processing. Over the years, we developed people from many different cultures. I know at one Catholic hospital I worked at, they actually sponsored people from Russia, Romania, Yugoslavia to come to the United States to work here and get their papers. And so we started seeing this influx of many different cultures. This became an issue in some cases because these cultural beliefs or behaviors were different from ours, and we had to learn them. And when you have these misunderstandings, it can create a lot of friction between the people in the department, which we don't want to have. So one of the things we did was every year at Christmas time, we would have everybody bring in a dish from their native country. Then they would talk about their, what they made and what it meant in their country and what have you. Now, these were the days, and we've talked about this, where we didn't have lounges. We didn't have a staff, lounge where we could do in-services or have our breaks. We always had to go to the cafeteria. So when we had our parties, we heated up the food where? In the sterilizers. We lined the autoclave cart. The sterilizers were hot. We put the food in, put a sign, do not start it. And that was it. That's the way it was in the early 80s. Didn't have anything else. But it really helped people to understand the cultural differences. Sometimes the cultural differences have to do with hygiene, and that's another issue that maybe you have to discuss with the person. You may have to get HR involved, but we have to understand the differences in the people and how they work in order for the department to really function well. I have to have a bunch of different people. I had one girl that everybody disliked, but she was my go-to person for patience and resilience. If she had a tray come down and it was a disaster, she would have the patience to pick through and get everything out and get it in order. Might take her an hour and a half, but nobody else wanted to touch that tray. So you have to have a mix of people. You have your people that are your superstars that can do trays quickly and fast. You have your average person that does a good job, but they need a little more time. And then you have the people who are much slower, but they can do the menial tasks that nobody else wants to do. And we have to recognize that. You can't put everybody with all the eggs in the same basket.
Yep. Yeah, I think we really at this point should I'm going to pick a subject that I think is going to benefit our listeners from the SPD part to the operating room. Releasing trays before their sterilization cycle is complete. And I know that's the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues between the operating room and sterile processing, wanting the tray before it's fully processed.
What do you mean, before it's cooled or before
cooled, or stop the autoclave? I want to put it in the IUSS. Cooling is a massive one.
Yes.
If you're got a policy and you got instructions and somebody else is trying to make you break those, that's an ethic problem, and that's something that's got to be addressed.
First of all, we go back to what is your policy. If you don't follow your policies, then you could be found negligent in a court of law, period. So, people say we don't do IUSS, and next thing you know, they're doing it left and right. In a court of law, you're going to be found negligent. Just because you have an immediate use policy doesn't mean you do it all the time. But if you're doing it, you need a policy. Yes. Now, if somebody needs what we call a quick turn, and that's another issue, quick turns in the operating room. What's a quick turn? In a court of law, you know what a quick turn says to me? Bless it. And that's it. Okay. Yep. We're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because we need this really quick. It doesn't matter where it's being processed. If you need that tray turned around because you have to do immediate use, fine. I have a form. You call us and tell us, I need this tray and I need it 11 o'clock. When we get the tray, I'm going to call you back and say, hey, the tray just came here. It's 9:30. It's not going to be wrapped and sterilized and back to you by 11 o'clock. So we will clean it according to the IFU. We will send it back to you. You can perform immediate use. That's the way it should be. Not stop the process or shortcut the process, because we're the ones that are going to be liable. Ethically, it's wrong for the patient. That patient has not been told, oh, we were in a hurry today, so we had to shortcut your process. Really? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
It's like going to a restaurant and they put the food on the table, but there's no dish. And you look at them, what are you doing? Well, I'm sorry, we ran out of dishes today. Well, it's the same thing. You're running a hospital. You don't have enough instruments? If you don't have enough instruments, there are procedures to still keep the patient safe. And even though immediate use is not the best process, now with it being in a closed container, there's less chance of contamination. But does the device or tray even have immediate use instructions? And now with the container, they're putting more and more of that responsibility on sterile processing. Are they being forced to perform immediate use on instruments that don't have immediate use instructions?
Correct.
All of this is unacceptable, but you need a very strong manager with a very strong policy that states on manufacturer's instructions policy, we will not process any device without manufacturer's instructions for use that are current manufacturer's instructions for use. Okay? Yep. If it's not in there, it doesn't happen. And if the OR says you're going to do it or else, and I've had a number of technicians who have called me from around the country and told me that they were given that ultimatum. I told them you have two choices. Have them put it in writing, and then you make documentation that you keep at home, that you were forced to do it, despite your telling them in writing that this was not possible because there were no instructions for use. Or you could quit and say, I'm not going to work here because you don't follow the best practices.
Yeah. I've actually been have something on like a wrap set waiting to be, is cooling, waiting in the operating room, waiting for it, and having a sales rep come into the department and go, is this, can I take it? Is it dry yet? Touching it when it's still not cool. And I tell them, thank you for touching it, because now I have to restart the whole process over again. And we would rip it open in front of him, rewrap it, and put it back in the autoclave.
Well, what I would do when the operating room would call down and say, we need this tray right now. And I said, it's not cool. You know what the policy is. No, we need it right now. I said, well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break the tapes, because it's going to make sure that you're going to have to reprocess it. Now, if you let it sit here for another 10 or 15 minutes, it'll probably be cool enough. It's going to take you longer than that to run an immediate use cycle. No, we want it now. Okay, so I break the tape. Now it's your problem. I mean, I hate feeling like that, but I am not going to be part of the problem. I'm not going to be hauled into a court of law and say, why did you do it when you know it's wrong? I have no defense. Yes. And remember, when we release something from our department, we are the manufacturer, and we are telling the person in the operating room that that item is safe to use, or we wouldn't have released it. Then why did we? Do you think anybody in the jury is going to say, oh, well, they forced me to do it? And they're going to say, where's your ethics? Why didn't you go up the chain of command? If the OR wouldn't listen, why didn't you go to the infection control or risk management department? But people don't do it. They don't do it, and I don't know why.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that I don't think the average techs realize they can wound up, find themselves in court. I think they
Oh,
think that's the nurse and the manager, and
yeah,
not realize when they're signing their name, they're okaying that, saying that they okayed it and they're doing the work. And
yeah.
that could be subpoenaed, and that's where they can, especially if they're, and I'm not even especially if they're certified or not, you're going to have to go to court, but you're going to be held to a higher standard when they present certification.
The technicians need to realize is that the days of sterile processing being hidden in the basement are over. I mean, there's case after case after case. Some of them, the people are even posting on social media. You brought a couple to my attention. And
Yes.
because administration wouldn't listen to the problems they're having. Now, in that case, they would be protected by whistleblower status. And might be difficult finding another job because your name gets dragged through the mud, but you have to do what's right in that case.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what anybody says, if you're standing up for the patient, that's going to be good points when it comes to a lawsuit, that
Yeah.
you did what you had to do, and you would have a case of unfair termination if
Mm-hmm.
if you were able to prove in a court of law that what you were doing was the right thing and why you were doing it. But
Yeah.
it all falls back to the manager. We should not have technicians in a position where they have to make these decisions. If
Correct.
if you have your policies, that's what guides their practice.
Mm-hmm.
If it happens on a weekend, if it happens on a holiday, if it happens off shift, yeah, you call the manager. That's what your job is. Your management job is not 8 to 5. Your management job is 24/7. I had
Yeah.
many calls, weekends, holidays, and what have you. But they were under very extenuating circumstances. And I had no problem with my staff calling me. But
Oh
if your
yeah.
staff is calling you morning, noon, and night, then you either have very poor policies, the policies aren't where they can refer to them, or your staff hasn't been properly trained. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Also, it's a good key thing as for a sterile processing manager to, do. So we have some of these policies in sterile processing that, yes, would benefit the operating room's knowledge to know it, but they don't necessarily, they're not going to, they're probably not even reviewing their own policies half the time with the staff. You're not going to expect them to know your policy. So it's not a bad thing to do once in a year. If you have a policy for unloading and cooling, ask to go to this a perioperative staff meeting and go over the policy once a year with them so they can understand that that is not just your recommendation, it is a policy.
Yeah, well, what we did in our system, whether you reported to materials management or perioperative, because we were half and half, all of your sterilization policies had to be signed off by sterile processing, perioperative director, materials if they reported to them, and infection prevention.
Mhm.
And what we did was, in lieu of taking the new hires down to SPD, because it was difficult to get them out, so they said, they had me do a Periop 101 training program. And it was 4 days, and I went through every single step of what we did. I had pictures and videos and everything so that they understood what our policies were and how they impacted on them, why they needed to understand what we did. So they had a better understanding of why we couldn't just send them something when it was hot. And that really changed the relationship between the operating room and SPD. They would call us and say, hey, what do I do about this? They use this as a reference and a resource. And that's when you know that you have done your job.
Sterile processing is starting to become more of an independent department, more versus being under materials or periop services. And years ago, when it was more when the ones that I worked in that were more periop, we did get to have that chance with the operating room nurses when they hired them. They would and surgical techs, they would bring them in, and we would do that. And and now that it's becoming more separate, less of that is happening, which is causing more of the chaos and the problems.
Yeah, understood. there's another issue, and it has to do with patient confidentiality, and we've all heard of HIPAA.
Yes.
This also is an ethical issue. I had one of our employees in the hospital was having a breast biopsy, and everyone was very concerned. She was an OR aide, and apparently, when they tested the biopsy while she was on the table, it was malignant, so they had to go on to do a mastectomy. 2 of the OR employees were in the elevator saying, "Oh, did you hear about Mary? What happened? Her tumor was malignant. They have to do a mastectomy," not knowing that the patient's husband was in the elevator on his way to go up to speak to the surgeon, and this is the way he found out.
Oh.
Yes, there was a major. Both of those individuals were fired, and it really set up a thing where they made everybody in the hospital had to go back and redo the HIPAA in service, so they understood it. And I did some research, Jason, and I think it's important for everybody, because it's not just the technicians. In SPD, you have a lot of information that other people don't have. And sometimes they'll say, "Nancy, my sister's having surgery. Can you let me know how she is?" No, I can't. I don't care who you are. Never provide any patient information unless it's required for patient care. Avoid discussions in public places such as elevators, coffee shops, cafeteria. Penalties for civil violations. An unknowing penalty range of $100,000 to $50,000 per violation, with an annual maximum of $25,000 for repeats. A HIPAA violation with reasonable cause penalty of $1,000 to $50,000, with an annual maximum of $100,000 for repeats. A willful neglect violation, which is then corrected within the required time period, still has a $10,000 to $50,000 per violation, with an annual maximum of $250,000 for repeat. And willful neglect, and it's not required within the required time, $50,000 with an annual maximum of $1.5 million. So the penalties are very, very severe. However, there's also criminal penalties. Criminal violations of HIPAA are handled by the Department of Justice, and there's different levels of severity. Covered entities and specified individuals who, quote, knowingly obtain or disclose individually identifiable health information in violation of Administrative Simplification Act face a fine of $50,000 as well as imprisonment to 1 year. Offenses committed under false pretexts, where you got the information, using false information, allows penalties to be increased to $100,000 with 5 years in prison. And offenses committed with intent to sell, transfer, or use information against someone, fines of $250,000 and up to 10 years imprisonment. This is really serious, and I don't think people realize how serious HIPAA violations are.
I tell you, HIPAA for an operating room or sterile processing or recovery room or pre-op nurse, and I'm not saying HIPAA for patients, I'm HIPAA for themselves.
Yeah.
If you ever have to be a patient in a hospital and you work in those areas, it is so hard to protect yourself from everybody knowing what you're having done.
Yeah, you're right.
Like,
you're absolutely correct.
Like a lot of people don't know that, because when you're having surgery, you want to go to the place
I've had a couple of colleagues who went to other hospitals, not because they didn't want to be at their own hospital, because the hospital had excellent care, but for that exact reason, they wanted the confidentiality.
Can't get it.
There's another ethical issue that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, and that's facility property, equipment, instruments, and people damaging them or not treating them correctly. One of my facilities, we had sterile processing, had a long corridor, and then we went into a big room where we had the patient care equipment. One night, one of my technicians decided, I guess she had nothing better to do, she decided to ride the IV pump on it, and she ran like a scooter, and it tipped over, and the thing fell on the floor. She got hurt, and the pump was completely damaged. She was suspended for a week. I mean, this was the worst lack of judgment. First of all, we wonder why sterile processing gets a bad name. When you do things like that, you didn't realize that damage could occur to that. And not only that, you have nothing better to do than to ride it like a scooter. I mean, and we see this all the time where people will bang things and throw things and not clean them the way they're supposed to get cleaned. And then hopefully the next person's going to get caught for it. That's an ethical, really bad ethical issue that we have to address, because this equipment is so expensive. And not only that, you're now preventing the next patient from getting that equipment. You may not have enough of it. So there's so many things that it impacts on, and you very rarely hear that talked about in any conversation.
People coming in a bad mood, slamming things down, scopes, cameras. Some people, we talk about that, the ethics of that and reporting. That's happening. You got to think about the company. Like if you're sitting next to somebody and you watching them do trays and you notice they don't use their magnifying lamp once, have no light on, they're not even inspecting it, they're just throwing the instruments on there.
Yep.
I know it's going to look like you're the tattletale or something, but you got to kind of let your superiors know that this person's not doing their job right. Doesn't mean they need to be written up or fired right away. A little reminder or find out what's going on, but you can't just let it happen.
Well, there are steps in every facility for corrective action. I would always start with, like you said, informal. Mary, I'm by your table, your lamp wasn't even warm, so I know you're not using it. And that's the policy. Yep. If it happens a second time, then it's going to be written, because I've already spoken to you. And when you do a counseling, you still write it up and put it in their file. And then you have to go on, because you've already explained the importance. This is our policy. You have to be following it. And if they fail to do it, then it's non-compliance with a stated policy. That's a serious violation. Yep. When you see the name of a tray, now again, we have tracking systems, but not everybody does. Your tracking systems will tell you if the tray has to go in steam. Many of them will even tell you the cycle, pre-vacuum 274 minutes. That's fine. But not everybody has that. Okay. I always say, who did due diligence on the data entry? Because I can tell you in many instances where I've gone through and done a review, there were multiple errors. So, if you're going to put total dependence on that system, you better make sure that it's accurate, because it's supposed to save people time that don't have to go back and check something. But it is the responsibility of the person who's preparing the tray to provide any additional documentation. For example, if something has to go in STERRAD, there's a label that you could put on. If something has to go on gravity 250, you have to put on a label. There's a label. There's a label that says warning, special cycle. That means they have to go to the references. I had a chart, this was before tracking systems, that was in the sterilization area next to each sterilizer. And all the special cycles were there. But today, people just assume that, what is there is what they have to do. We have to do as much as we can to make sure that problems are not created. The more that we could do that, the better off we're going to be. If we depend on the person in autoclaving, and you know how expensive cameras are. I think this particular camera was like 20 grand. And I was called in because an employee had steam sterilized a camera that was supposed to go in low temperature. Now, the employee claimed that the person who wrapped it for steam, which she did. So the employee who wrapped it was at fault as well. But this person actually put it in the steam sterilizer, and she was claiming she wasn't responsible because it was wrapped for steam. I should have just been able to put it in. No, you might have 10,000 things that you sterilize. You remember every one of them? And when was the last time you sterilized the camera in steam? I mean, maybe today they're autoclaved, but back then they weren't. So both of them wound up getting suspended because they did not follow the policy.
Yeah.
But sterilization is a very, very rigid. There is no wiggle room when it comes to sterilization. Every step from point of use treatment in the operating room to sterile storage, because we could still mess it up there. We don't
Yep.
store them correctly. How many times have you go into sterile storage and because we don't redate things anymore, which hopefully people are doing now, you've got dusty bins, dusty shelves, things are cracked, stacked up 10 high because we don't have enough space. So every step is important. But when it comes to sterilization, the actual exposure, they need to verify that information.
No,
And
they need to know.
Sterilizer operator. And furthermore, at the end of the cycle, they're supposed to read and interpret the printout. Now, maybe the person who put it in is not the person who takes it out. And that's a disadvantage because the person who's taking it out is just reading the printout. They don't know what was in the load. If it was a load that they look and they see 250 gravity, you go, wait a minute, what was this load for? They might go back and check it and see if they hit the wrong button. But both of them have to work together. Who puts it in and who takes it out to make sure that all the parameters were met and everything in that load. For example, if it was an implant load, did they put a BI in there? Now, a lot of places have moved to every cycle BI. If you can afford it, great. But as people understand, if you only need it, the beginning of the day and during an implant cycle, we have to make sure it gets done. So we can't do, like you were talking about before, releasing something before it's cool because somebody's stomping their feet. No, our policy is we will not release it. And if they insist on releasing it, the manager has to step in and tell them what I did. We're going to break the seals and you're going to have to flash it because it does not meet our policy, period.
Yep. One of the other things too is people rely on in sterilization, third-party information for sterilization. And good example of this, and this was you and I don't know if you'll remember this, but you and I were together at a facility and it just so we were consulting and we were just so happened they had a instrument that kind of fell apart in a patient.
Yeah.
And then when you said to them, because they came to us and you said, well, get me the manufacturer's instructions for sterilization. And they provided 3 of them, which were all 3 different. And one was from the rep, one was on file in the department, and one was from the company.
Yeah.
And they all 3 had different sterilization recommendations.
It is up to the facility to verify that they have the most current IFU. I know that everybody's dependent on the IFUs that are on a computer because it saves a lot of time and they can have it, one in decontam where they can reference it there. That's fine. But are you sure it's the most current? That company can't, they would need 100 people because IFUs are updated all the time. But if you're going to have updated IFUs, the manual system I have is that at least every 2 years, they're going to update their IFUs. I also tell them when you reorder something, order something or reorder, make sure that they provide an IFU. And then when it comes in, you're going to check, there's a reference number on the bottom of the IFU. You're going to look and see if that's a different number than the one you have. If it is, then that's the newer one, and you'll date it so you know when to update it. I learned this lesson many years ago at one of my hospitals where we were sterilizing a cable that was used in endoscopy, and it had to go in ethylene oxide, and it was reusable. So they ran out, they ordered more, they came in, and I didn't see it. They put it on the shelf, and I asked them for the instructions for use. When they handed them to me, they said, this is a single-use device. Do not re-sterilize. And the company changed the product, but never told anybody, which was fine. But I'm going to myself, what if I didn't have that IFU? Because I've always been anal about them since 2001. They would have been sterilizing this in ethylene oxide and reusing a single-use device. So there's a number of reasons why those IFUs were so important.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got to make sure that you're using the most current one. And I find that when you call the company and you say, I have IFU reference number 12345, they'll say, oh no, that's outdated. Okay, but you send me the new one.
And very important too for everyone to understand. You also know how to read them and know your AMI standards.
Yeah.
To know that because the IFU can be wrong. Well, not wrong, but not approved for United States sterilization.
Oh no, they've been wrong. Yeah. I've had them wrong too. I've had them wrong too. I had one that came out from a major company, and they just sent it to me and said, would you check this for us before we go out to print? And they were telling you to load for sterilization, stack the trays up to 3 high. Ooh. And I came up, I said, are you kidding me? I said, we can't stack trays in the autoclave. And he said, what do you mean? They do it all the time. We see it in hospitals. I said, well, then you're going to the wrong hospitals. Now, that time we could stack it in sterile storage. And I thought he was mistaking that. He said, no, in the sterilizer. That's what we see. So don't be afraid to challenge something. And, of course, with the temperature, that's another whole thing. And, of course, on that one where we had the 2 transducers, I told that story where the rep came in. And that's another thing. We love our reps, but don't ever take any information verbally, okay? Yes. And he told the OR, you can sterilize this whole tray, 274 minutes vacuum, no problem. 2 different transducers. Again, I'm going, why do we have different colors, 2 different transducers? He brings in the information. He faxed it to me because he didn't bring it in. And I see that the one transducer had to be sterilized for an hour at 270.
Oh, wow.
I've never in my career seen that. I called the company and I said, look, I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen a 1-hour exposure at 270 pre-vac. And he said, no, he said, the design of that, the FDA required an hour of sterilization. But if I didn't question that and we just went on the verbal,
you would have done 4 minutes.
Sterilized for 4 minutes. So don't be afraid to question it. And I keep telling people, when you have a technical question, you have to ask for technical services or the product manager. Customer service is only going to read back what's in the IFU. Okay, they can't answer technical questions because they're not technical people. But that is your responsibility. You put that in the sterilizer, you own it.
Absolutely. All right, Nance. This is one of, I think, the favorite slide.
Well, yeah, this is the way we're going to end it up.
Yep.
Falsification. You can't rationalize non-compliance with a stated policy or IFU. There is no jury that's going to accept that. Documents that are falsified can lead to immediate termination of employment. Falsified documents can lead to even criminal prosecution, depending on what you falsified. And falsification of documentation of CEUs can lead to revocation of your license or certification. So don't get in the trap of trying to save yourself by falsifying information. It's only going to come back to hurt you. Own up to a mistake when you make it. The cover-up is worse than the offense itself. Everyone makes mistakes. We're all human. We try not to make them. But the moral and ethical thing to do is, if you make a mistake, immediately own up to it so we can correct it. That's the bottom line. Ensure safety for our patients, because that's the ethical thing, the right thing to do.
God, nobody could say it better than you. All right. Well, I want to thank our listeners. This has been a fantastic program. Thank you, Nancy. Please like, subscribe. Anything that you would like to see us do, please leave in the comments. We appreciate your support. Again, Nancy, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone listening to this. This is a topic very near and dear to both Jason and myself, because we're true patient advocates, and I know all of you are too. So we wanted to give you a little more information so that you know the right thing to do. Thank you.
To receive your free CEU approved by the CBS SPD and HSPA, go to www.spdceus.com Watch the entire podcast on the Sterile Processing University page, and then after that, you will receive a free 1-hour CEU. Thank you.